Hello and welcome to the Jackcast, your Swansea City podcast. I'm Matt Brocco and I'm joined today by Steve and Carol. Hi, Steve.
Morning.
Well, we promised we'd come back with a podcast, Steve, didn't we, when we had some news? So it's been a little bit of a quiet period. We thought, to be honest, that we may have done a podcast sooner, but the news, well, the lack of news really rumbled on, and the rumours kept growing, but very little was coming out to the club, wasn't it? That I think for a lot of fans, not all fans, mind, some people did still choose to believe that there wasn't much going on and we were just all being a bit panicky. But I think a lot of fans, Steve, believed that there was something going on behind the scenes at this point, and so it proved with the announcement that Steve Cooper and the club have decided to part ways by mutual termination of his contract. He had 1 year left, of course. First and foremost, let's get into it. Does it come as a surprise to you?
I think it's a weird one, isn't it? Because it did drag on for so long. I mean, you look at, there's been speculation of him being linked with other jobs. Pre-season started, and there was incredible silence really from him. You always expect to hear something from a manager. I mean, a couple of players came in, and obviously there was no real quotes from the manager on that. It took 2 whole weeks for the manager to give any sort of interview. And then obviously a couple of days later, we had that Plymouth friendly where he did face the press. And he didn't really, it wasn't, I don't know, how can I word it really? What he said didn't inspire me that he was staying. Like he didn't pour cold water on the fact that, on the speculation, it was just more a case of, well, I'm here at the moment type of thing. And then obviously we get the news the day after, and when you hear then that obviously the decision was made 2 weeks ago, then it sort of left me a bit flabbergasted, really, because that doesn't seem like a great way to run a football club. I mean, if you make the decision, then it needed dealing with very quickly, and limping on for another couple of weeks. From my point of view, I don't think that's a great move. I don't know about you.
Well, it's a complicated one, isn't it? Because I remember we were speaking about this at the time, and you expressed your shock at the fact that Winter openly said that it was something that had happened 2 weeks prior. But I guess we'll probably not hear the full story behind it. But you do wonder what exactly has gone on there. Of course, we've heard that Cooper's agreed to stay on, so the team get a pre-season. Obviously, they get their fitness drills in, and things carry on whilst we are effectively managerless, which is nice in one way that he's helped to create that stability, and we haven't got this complete black hole of a period in the pre-season program. But at the same time, you wonder what pre-planning's gone into it, because you can be sure that even the day after the playoff final, Steve, and perhaps even before the playoff final, when the rumours started coming out about Crystal Palace and then later about Fulham, and these links, these supposed interviews, that the ball was rolling then, really, from the club's court, because those conversations with Cooper would have happened quite soon. They would have, where's your interest, where's your head, are you wanting to talk to these clubs, etc. And obviously then you speculate, because you wonder then, well, how come we're left in a position where Cooper's had to hang on for 2 weeks? So was it possible, and I know this is pure speculation on my part, but is it possible that someone like Michael Appleton was someone who interested the club before we got that horrible news that he was fighting, testicular cancer, which he's taken time out of football to deal with? So with that, you have to wonder, something perhaps has gone on that has maybe rocked the boat a little bit from the Swans' planning perspective, because it's certainly an odd one, isn't it? You don't see it happen often that a manager just is in situ, because Cooper leaving, whilst it may surprise some people, surely those at the club knew this was happening quite a while ago, when the talk about Palace and Fulham was happening.
Yeah, I think there must have been discussions behind the scenes for quite a while. I think that it's almost a case of they'd had a discussion, and I think they were hoping that someone was going to come in. I think the club were thinking that, and the manager was really just thinking. It's probably a little bit like when Sousa was here. I think there was like an uneasy relationship, and an offer came in, and we didn't stand in his way, and then we went down a different route. And I think that it looked like that could well happen with this situation. But then when the Palace job that went to Patrick Vieira, obviously there was the West Brom job. Valerian Ishmael took that, and then the last one was the Fulham job, which went to Marco Silva. And I think when that happened, really, I think all the jobs were taken. It was pretty obvious then that, you know, Cooper was either going to have to leave in the situation that he has done, or was going to have to continue because nobody was going to be taking him. So I think, reading between the lines, obviously, when they talk about that 2 weeks, that's what was then decided, that he wasn't going to continue in the role. So they had to then make that decision, really, didn't they? But I mean, they should really have moved a little bit quicker. I think. I mean, hanging on for those couple of weeks, as I say, is not really the ideal thing you can say about this. You know, making sure we had a pre-season. But I think when Rodgers came in, like I say, once Sousa had left, we had a similar type of thing where I think Alan Curtis and Colin Pascoe maybe took training. I mean, we've got other coaches here. I mean, Alan Tate could have taken it. So, you know, I think the whole situation just isn't ideal at all, is it, really? I mean, we've got 2 weeks to go now until the first game of the season. We don't have a manager. I mean, how is a manager meant to come in here and try to possibly change things in a short period of time? I mean, I always look back to when Graham Potter was given his full pre-season, and we could see straight away that we wanted to play this nice style of football. And obviously what he'd been doing had worked. I mean, it wasn't like the finished article or anything, but he'd had enough time to implement ideas. And I think this man, whoever the next manager is going to find it quite tough, really. He's going to be behind everybody else. So we probably are going to end up starting the season slowly. But we could look at it the other way and say that if we'd kept Cooper, he didn't want to be here anymore and we weren't fussed at him.
Yeah.
Again, we were probably going to start slowly and then end up sacking him after 10 games. So
it'd be worse if he'd been sacked in November, scaremonger or whatever. But the idea of us changing managers mid-season, you're right. We have to manage expectations now, don't we, with the fan base, and realise that this isn't. Nothing is ever. I mean, look, Martinez came in mid-season to replace Kenny Jackett. Or towards the latter part of the season at least, and that wasn't a fix overnight. You know, that there was a little bit of grumbling in the stands, or a fair bit of grumbling in the stands early doors of Martinez's reign, where people just couldn't see, you know, the bigger picture of what he was building. But of course, it does take time to get there. We benefited, and realistically, I mean, when you look back, we speak very highly of Graham Potter, and I think with justification, but it was really the latter end of the season under Graham Potter that Swans really came into fruition. So I think these things take time, don't they? And I can't expect John. I say we'll talk about John Eustace as a prospective new manager, which seems to be all but signed at the moment. In a little while, but any new manager to come in. To necessarily get us playing, you know, silky football again overnight, and perhaps, you know, it's going to be a little bit of a bumpy start, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, you would think so. I mean, the only precedent which I can think of is the Sousa Rodgers one, as I've said, and I remember on that where I think Rodgers came in. I think it was 3 weeks before the start of the season. We went to Hull on the opening day. I remember just thinking that we did look a little bit out of our depth. We just looked as if we were behind everybody else. But, you know, it was one of those where you don't really blame the manager in that instance. I mean, everyone can have a poor game, but you just think that it did have an impact. But to be fair, I remember the next game that we played Preston, we won 4-0, and then we went to Norwich, and even though we lost, we gave him hiding. So to be fair to Rodgers there, he did manage to, you know, make an impact pretty quickly, even though the cards were stacked against it. But at the end of the day, we are talking about a top manager here. So, you know, it is going to be quite tough. I think this division isn't very forgiving, as we know. I mean, the schedule can be quite relentless, and you know, you look at it in the first few weeks of the season. I mean, I think we've got 5 games in August. Only 2 of them are at home, so it will be challenging. But at the same time, I think if a manager doesn't want to be here, then that decision needed to be made as well. It's just that it should really have been sorted out long before now, and a new manager should have been in a good couple of weeks ago, I would say.
Let's talk about the relationship then that Cooper had within the club, first of all. It appeared as though a lot of the senior players liked him, although there's been a weird lack of comment from the club on the players since he's gone, which perhaps flies in the face of that comment that I've just made. But particularly then, let's say Andrea, who was always quick to go over and hug Cooper, and he scored, or the Swans won. But perhaps at boardroom level, not always as warm and cosy as perhaps previous regimes, Steve, because Cooper wasn't backwards and coming forwards, was he, and talking about the lack of support he may have got from boardroom level, and holes he wanted to fill within the squad that the club hadn't managed to supply him with, in particular the number 9 he craved for much of last season. So in some respects, again, it's not a great surprise that this has come to pass, because I think whereas he had a strong relationship with Trevor Birch, who was a very vocal chairman and liked to keep people abreast of all the news and keep fans on side, and maybe Julian Winter slightly plays his cards slightly differently in that respect, and he's a little bit quieter on that front, and doesn't look like maybe he had such a warm relationship with Cooper, at least on the front of it, because I'm just going from Cooper's comments really on anything, because Winter hasn't given us much at all, but Cooper was quite vocal at times last season on what he was missing and what he felt he could have done more with.
Yeah, the other thing is, don't forget that Trevor Birch was the man ultimately that did give Steve Cooper the job, so that you'd expect there to be a close relationship there because it's his man, whereas Winter's sort of inherited him, didn't he? So, that immediately makes you think that, the relationship may not be as good. If you look at a few things, I never really remember Cooper criticising Birch. There were one or two criticisms of the club after he'd moved on. You think of like the Dan James, Ollie McBurney deals. They were pretty good. Nobody really moaned at them, did they? But let's be honest, the Joe Roden deal wasn't very good. And everyone was quite annoyed by it. And I think that probably was a bit of a black mark for Winter, I would say, certainly from my point of view, because I didn't think that we got anywhere near value for money. And it seemed to me as if we just accepted the first bid, whereas I think with Birch, it did seem to be a bit harder to buy our players off us. It wasn't the case that we were saying that we're not going to sell people, but at the same time, we're not going to accept derisory money, which is what I think we had for Roden. So, there was the criticism, wasn't there, about Christopher Peterson, a player that Cooper did sign for a nominal fee, but didn't play him a great deal. But obviously he was pulled from his squad, wasn't he? I think that was probably his way of saying that he wasn't very happy with the way that things were. And as you say, that striker was wanted. But at the same time, I think Cooper can't really say that he wasn't backed in a reasonable way. He brought in quite a lot of loan players. There was a fair few on freeze. Obviously, he was able to keep Andreu. I'm sure maybe the club would have liked to have put him out if they could have, but there's no takers. What can you do? And you look at the previous manager, who was really shafted, especially on the deadline days where people were booted out and nobody really came in. And I think only 5 players arrived in that time. And obviously, we look back at the first transfer window there just after we'd been relegated, and we were left essentially with Mike van der Horn at centre half, and then Joe Roden had to play because there physically wasn't anybody else. So I don't think this manager was dealt the type of poor cards that Graham Potter was, if I'm honest. So it's a tricky one. I look at the Jamal Lowe signing, for example. 900 grand on him, and we weren't playing with wide men. Maybe that money could have been spent on a striker, if we're being honest. That's certainly how I look at it. I'm not knocking Lowe especially, but he's not a striker. And if you're going to play with 2 up front, why would you not sign a striker instead?
Yeah, I always thought with Jamal Lowe, and I'm sure you had a similar feeling at the time, that it was more an opportunism signing rather than someone we targeted. Wigan were cash strapped and selling anything that was worth anything. Much like teams, raped and pillaged us when we got relegated from the Premier League, and took everything. And Jamal Lowe, fairly young, exciting player that looked like an asset and was offered a cut price deal. And I dare say that in different circumstances we wouldn't have looked twice at Jamal Lowe, and certainly Cooper perhaps wouldn't have, because for as much as work as Jamal Lowe's put in, he didn't fit, and I still believe he doesn't fit the role he's been asked to do at this club. Like I say, he's not a striker. I mean, I don't think he'd ever profess to be a striker. Yet he spent his whole time here up front, and so he seemed to me to always be one that we picked up because he was available rather than someone that we actually wanted.
Yeah, that's probably a fair point. But I mean, if we're being honest, we went for the wrong Wigan player. Maybe you could argue we should have gone for Kiefer Moore.
Yeah,
because that's a proper striker, and obviously that's something that we didn't have. And you look at the 2 million that was spent on him by Cardiff, and got to say it was a bargain, really, isn't it? I mean, you could argue maybe that it wouldn't have suited us, but I mean, you always need different type of avenues of attack, and there's no reason why.
He's good. He's good on the floor as well, Moore, isn't he? I think he's shown that for Wales as well as Cardiff, in that he's not a.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, it was obviously a bargain, and I just don't know why you're buying wide players when you don't want to play with them. It doesn't really make a great deal of sense, does it? So, yeah, but it could well have been an opportunistic move based on the fact that he was going on the cheap. But I mean, when you've got a limited budget, they're probably not the type of deals that you should be doing, if you're honest. I mean, if you want to play with wide men, it's a little bit different, isn't it? But when you don't, it's it's a bit of a funny one.
There were moments, weren't there, which hinted at maybe the lack of communication or love with the boardroom, and also the moments that took the season one way or another. And you look at the double signing of Paul Areola and Jordan Morris, and as two perfect examples of that, really. Areola was quite clearly nothing to do with Steve Cooper, who had little interest in using him, and then sent him back to America. And Jordan Morris, who may or may not have had probably again nothing to do with Cooper, but actually looked a very useful acquisition before he cruelly his season come to an abrupt end just as he was getting into his stride. So I mean, I dare say things would have turned out a lot differently if we'd got half a season after Jordan Morris, but it wasn't to be. And things like that, Steve. We brought Morgan Whittaker in. Again, it looked like a club signing, young player, one for the future, but spent money on him. We spent money on him, and it was someone that the club maybe look at. They think we've got to bring him in because he'll be worth a lot more in a few years' time. But in the immediate, could we have spent and pulled together our resources and looked for an answer to our current issue, which was obviously getting out-and-out goal scorer?
Well, yeah, you would have thought so, wouldn't you? I mean, I'm not knocking Whittaker, like in general. I think maybe he'll come good, but I'm not massive on short-termism in football, but when you have like that last chance, really, before the parachutes end to get in the Prem, and you're looking at a striker for a couple of million, I mean, you really should be trying to do it if possible. I mean, you look at, I think Cody Woodrow was the one that was wanted, speculated, and it would have been about 2 to 2.5 million. Now, I mean, if you take that low money off the table and you take the Whittaker money off the table, then we're not far short of it, are we?
Yeah.
So,
and we were, just to put context to someone who may be listening who perhaps didn't follow the Swans that closely last season, we were at 1.2 points off the top of the league with a game in hand. So, it was in our destiny at one point before it all collapsed, really, and there'll be fingers pointed all over the place as to why that happened.
Yeah, exactly. We did have a big chance, really, there, didn't we? And we could have, that one player would have made the difference, I would have thought. But certainly would have won us more points. So, we do have to look at that with frustration. And I mean, as you say, the likes of Areola clearly wasn't a Cooper signing. I mean, if we'd not done that, for example, that would have been freed up more wages, wouldn't it? Or Jordan Morris maybe was more for Cooper, but obviously it didn't work out. That's one of those things. Injuries happen, unfortunately. But we've got to look at the January signings that we made in general. I mean, Hourihane obviously didn't do too badly, but didn't have the impact that we were looking for. And then you look at, obviously, Freeman came in. He barely played, did he? Hamer, I don't know if there was anybody else, but you'd have to say that basically our January business was a waste of time. So yeah, we could have saved a fair bit there, maybe just brought in Hurahan and brought in a striker, and we probably would have been looking at the same financial terms then. So I think that's what's frustrating. We didn't manage it very well, did we? And I think it should have been obvious, really, that a striker could have made a difference. But we didn't do it, and I suppose it contributed to us not going up in the end.
Gutted about the Hurahan thing, because I was absolutely certain that he would be the difference. And on the face of it, they provided the squad with Jordan Morris, Conor Hurahan, and I said, right, you've now got someone who should be able to create, particularly at this level, and you've got someone who can stick it in the back of the net as well. Or at least we hoped he could. And those were the two things we were looking to sort out. Our midfield was desperately lacking that sort of creativity, and as we talked about the number 9 situation, like now they're really happening. Hurahan, I'll go perhaps a little bit harsher than you, and I'll say he probably was a flop on the whole. He was more of a player who was great on YouTube highlight reels, really, wasn't he? He could produce moments of magic, but go missing for so long in a game. He didn't impose himself. He was a passenger and didn't get stuck in. So yeah, I was gutted because I genuinely thought he was a level above this, and proved not to be the case, unfortunately. But enough about the transfer business. We have to look a little bit further ahead now and look at where that leaves our current coaching setup, really, Steve. Because all we've heard about is Cooper going. And with him came Mike Marsh and Martin Margetson. And what happens with them? Do you think they stay, or do you think they go with?
I mean, this is an interesting question, really. I mean, as things stand, I mean, why would they maybe want to go if there's an option to stay? Because obviously Cooper has left, but he hasn't got another job, has he? So the others could be putting themselves out of work, and you just don't know, do you? I mean, Mike Marsh has worked at a few places. Obviously, he has worked with Cooper with the England under-17s, and I think he's been a coach at Liverpool before, hasn't he? I think he was at Huddersfield a couple of years back. So as much as obviously he is Cooper's right-hand man in the last 2 jobs, he has worked with other people. So it may not be that, they come as this package. You get some people, don't you, where, they always work with the same people. I mean, you look at, I remember when Brian Flynn came here, I think it was obvious that Kevin Reeves was going to come with him. For example, Harry Redknapp has always got his Joe Jordans and people like that, hasn't he, there with him. So, whether it's like that or not, I don't know. I mean, I think he's probably more likely to leave than maybe a Margetson. I think Margetson has had, again, quite a few clubs. I think he's worked with Cardiff previously, hasn't he? Obviously, he's worked with Wales. He's with the England setup at the moment. He's worked with Sam Allardyce, I think, at Crystal Palace and at Everton. So, it's a difficult one to say. I mean, if Cooper's walking into another job, there's always a chance he'll take people with him. But I mean, as things stand, I mean, if the next manager is happy to work with these people, then I don't really know why they'd look to go. Although obviously, once Cooper does get another job, which I'm sure will happen at some point, then you may well see them going with him then. But I mean, as things stand, I think there's a reasonable chance they'll stay unless the next manager doesn't want them.
Yeah, well, of course, there's 2 sides to that story. As you just pointed out, the new manager, whoever he may be, may wish to bring in his own backroom team, which, again, is not uncommon at all, and may see that we do change Marginson and Marsh. I think Marginson in particular is someone who is widely credited, Steve, with some of the defensive work we took in last season, the set pieces in particular. And so I can't speak, massively around Mike Marsh's impact and stuff, but certainly we can see on the pitch the work that Margetson did would absolutely be an asset to any future coaching team going forward. So maybe if there's hope for that to continue, then hopefully we can get that done. On the pitch, then, of course, this season is still to come upon us, and the transfer window and is starting to get some comings and goings around the country now. And whether that sees a couple of Swans players heading through the exit door, there's obviously the spectre, if you like, now of the lack of parachute payments, which we were dreading, because now it's the family silver again needs to be looked at and what we can raise funds with, and that's a very small pool now, isn't it? We've got rid of most of the things that have any value, certainly in the short term. So we're probably looking at about 2 players, aren't we? We're looking at the likes of Connor Roberts, who of course now is injured, so that might save us, and Matt Grimes, who, from certain people around, expect to be one that might leave in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I mean, I think with Roberts, the fact that he is injured for quite a while, that may well count against him, really. So I think he's probably the more likely one to stay. I mean, Grimes, we don't know who's interested, do we? But I mean, we've got to be realistic here. With both players have got a year left on their contracts. If we can't get them to put pen to paper, then we need to look at what we're going to do. I mean, I'm not saying we should take, a real derisory offer unless we absolutely have to. But I mean, if we're getting offers of 4 or 5 million, we might just have to go, okay, it's not great. It's not awful. We're just going to have to take it. I know that's not exactly what people want to hear, but we've got to make sure that our finances are in order. So, yeah, it is what it is, really. And if there's an opportunity to make money rather than losing people for free, then we probably have to go down that route if that's the options.
Which is typical, really, because I feel like Grimes had a fabulous season for us under Potter, and manager who will get a similar, playing back to that sort of style of football again, would certainly bring the best out of the captain. But that's football, really, isn't it? Maybe as we suspected throughout last season, maybe last year was our best chance for a couple of years to get back to the Premier League, and now we probably ask the same question as we asked on the eve of the first season in the Championship, which is, do we want to bounce straight back to the Premier League, or do we want to get back to playing football that we enjoyed? And my answer remains the same as it was a few years ago, Steve, which is, let's get back to playing football, because I think if we play football the right way, then should we return to the Premier League, we can build on it and we can survive. I don't think anyone could say with a straight face that we would have survived in the Premier League had we beaten Brentford at Wembley and Cooper had stayed. I think we would have been in for a hiding, to be quite honest. And yes, it would have been fabulous for the club's future and the finances, and that's why I wanted us to win. And I wanted us to get to the Premier League, because I think financially it would have sorted us out for a generation if we'd managed it well. But yeah, it wasn't to be, and we need to look at what we can take from that now and say maybe let's get back playing football and make sure that next time we do return to the Premier League, we make sure that we have another crack at it like we did under Rodgers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's different now, isn't it? In terms of, obviously, our finances are not great, but the parachutes have run out. So, in theory, now next year we won't take another hit. So we just need to try and be self-sustainable, really. I mean, I think we've got to accept that we've probably missed our chance to go back up now. So the aim really should be to be self-sustainable, to play the Swansea way, and to bring through youngsters. They're the three things that I'm sort of looking for, and then anything else is a bonus, really. So, I mean, if we know that the success we've had with adopting a certain philosophy, and I think Steve Cooper did move us away from it, so the next manager needs to bring us back to it. So, I mean, if we do that, then we can look to progress. Is the way of looking at it. It might be small steps. It can take time, can't it? I mean, look at, as you said earlier, under Graham Potter. I mean, at the end of that season, especially, we were on a bit of a roll, weren't we? Especially in the home games. But it can take time. I mean, Martinez, he was pretty quick getting a reaction, but remember in his first full season in charge, it wasn't until about the October time that we really picked up steam and then went on that run that got us towards the top of the division and ultimately won us promotion. So, it can take time to improve things, and like I say, you don't always get the results that reflect it overnight. But what we'd be looking for is the positive signs of the way that we're trying to play, and then trying to cut out the mistakes that will come with it. But that's definitely how we should look at it. We need to get back to playing good football again, because let's be honest, I don't think a lot of our fans, once they've finally returned this season now, are going to be very happy if we're serving up what we were watching last season, because it was not the easiest to watch.
No, and I think my gripe, my issue perhaps is that we've got the fans who will say, and some ex-players as well, that will say that it's a results business, and it's a valid argument. At the end of the day, you don't win anything for just being pretty on the eye. You have to actually do something with it, and I do understand that and appreciate that. But let's look at history. We don't have to go far back in history. Gary Monk got us our highest ever finish in the Premier League and our highest ever points total. But now, 85% of the Swans fan base acknowledge that his appointment was the wrong one. So if it's a results-based business, then you say that Gary Monk was the best thing that's happened to this club in 30 plus years. But if you say it's not, and you say actually what happened by getting us that high was our footballing philosophies were eroded, then can people not see the parallels here? Cooper got us as close as we could to the Premier League, but the footballing philosophies that were instilled by the previous regime have been eroded again. And those same people who were singing Cooper's praises, saying how brilliant it was that we were winning these games whilst only having 32% possession, will be the same ones that once we inevitably that fortune ebbs away and we end up falling away down the league, will be the ones calling for his head. But at that point, then we're struggling. Then we're drowning, if you like. And this perhaps I felt like was the right time, or this summer at least was the right timing to part ways. I can't understand why the same people who think that Gary Monk was a bad appointment for us like Steve Cooper and wanted him to stay, because to me they're very similar things. They both had great success, but at the cost of football, Steve.
Yeah, but I mean, it just depends what your outlook is. I mean, there's some people that are only bothered by results, or should I say, results will cloud everything. And then there's others that look at the bigger picture, and then there's people that want to see good football no matter what. So, I think we lean towards the good football, but there is a degree of realism that it is results-based business as well. I mean, you can't just play all this football and be down the bottom either. So, I mean, there's a balance in there. I mean, but yeah, you are right. I mean, look at that Monk season. There were some good performances, but there were a lot of smash and grab 1-0s. And then if you look at the next season, obviously it did catch up with us, didn't it? And obviously the manager found himself out of a job. So it's, yeah, I think when you look at it, I mean, there's a great interview from Angel Rangel a little while back, wasn't it? And he was saying about how we, rather than a team that looked to be on the possession and to dominate games, we became a team that were more firefighting. And when you do that, yeah, you might get away with it for a bit, but in the end, it tends to catch up with you. And I think it would have been more challenging this season for Steve Cooper. I must admit, because we obviously would have a weaker side, and you've got to think as well that the amount of sort of 1-0s where we rode our luck, and you can't keep getting away with that all the time. So we could have easily ended up struggling, and then if the football's not good and you're not getting results, in general, you tend to get a lot of criticism, and it can often end with the sack. So, I think that we definitely need to get back to playing what we know is the Swansea way, trying to dominate possession, creating chances, scoring goals, rather than this team that sits back, frustrates the opposition, and nicks a goal, really.
Yeah. And I do buy, obviously people will have different philosophies. My confusion is when it's the same people that acknowledge Monk being a mistake as the ones that are singing Cooper's praises. That is a conflict in my eyes. But going on to that, really, Steve, is the feeling from Swans fans. There is a mixed bag. I've not known a manager in recent times, Steve, that has split their fan base quite as much as Steve Cooper has. And it does come back to what we were just talking about. It's style versus substance. And it has really created, to an extent, some ill feeling between Swans fans. It really has, because there's been a quite the toxic division. between them. And I acknowledge my own part in that, and others too who've probably locked horns with me over the last couple of years will feel it, that there was been something that just wasn't feeling that he ever really won over the fan base. And there are some that will look at it and say, what are we doing? We finished in the playoff semi-finals, then we finished in the playoff final, and now we're getting rid of the bloke. And people will not understand, and I appreciate that, because from the outside looking in, you're bonkers. But at the same time, you talk about us going back to the stadium. I remember when we were in the stadium last, just before COVID, and it wasn't great. It really wasn't great, and there was a lot of disinterest and mumbles and grumbles in the stand then, and people were just getting fed up with watching it. And yes, okay, that middle of that season was quite a terrible one for us. I remember we were awful before COVID, and then we had the bounce back, of course, during lockdown, in which we came back and we made a surge for playoffs. But still, fans weren't enjoying the football. So it's interesting to see how much his mutual termination has again divided the fan base.
Yeah, it is. This can happen, really, can't it? I mean, as I keep going back to it, it is the style over substance thing, isn't it? Of, what do people ultimately want? And it does seem harsh when you've had 2 playoff finishes, to not be fussed on someone. But I think down here, ever since the Martinez days, especially, we like a certain brand of football, and if you're not playing it, then you're never going to be universally loved, are you? I mean, I look at Kenny Jackett, the manager before Martinez, and I have to say he had great success. He took us up, and then there was the couple of cup final wins. There was obviously where we playoff final, we lost the penalty shootout. We could have had back-to-back promotions, and only John Toshak has ever done that for the Swans. So, but again, he wasn't.
And you dare say, even in that, I mean, to be critical of Jackett never really unifying the fan base, but he perhaps had one of the most exciting Swans teams of a generation, and in his credit, he built that team.
Yeah, he did. There were definitely spells where I think he was very popular, but I think there was always this nagging doubt maybe about him, that he was one of them that he didn't really want to play this nice football in an ideal world. Obviously, there was rumours he wanted to get rid of Trundle, wasn't it? And then Martinez got binned at one point. And he backed down and decided to change it. But it was almost a bit like that wasn't his true belief. He was doing it because he felt maybe that he had to. So, but not every manager is going to be universally popular or loved. It's one of those things, really, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And it'll continue until the new manager comes in and we start seeing results or lack of results, because you can be sure that the wonder of hindsight will take its place in the next couple of months when if the new manager comes in and we're playing lovely football and we're towards the top half of the league, there'll be a lot of people saying, "I told you so," about Cooper being good for the club, and likewise, if it doesn't start very well, there'll be those saying, "Be careful what you wish for," which again, that's football for you, isn't it? Everyone's a pub manager, and I don't discount myself from that. So we're looking at who it could be, Steve. I mean, it looks done and dusted, but you can never say never with football. And but for all the reports and the talk coming out of the media at the moment, it looks like QPR assistant John Eustace is the favourite and is ready to sign on. He would have been in place for well, initially it looked like he could have been in place for today's pre-season friendly, which has since been called off, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But then it was going to be Monday, if indeed he does get the job. He was manager of Kidderminster, non-league. He was caretaker manager for a little bit at QPR. In fact, QPR stuffed us 4-0 while he was caretaker manager. Steve, he's had a little bit of management experience. He's still a little bit of an unknown quantity, but the talk is he likes to play football the right way. I know we heard that before with Cooper, but we've got to believe that that there are managers out there that will want to play football and make sure that they're doing it the right way. And he sounds like he's one of those.
Yeah, I mean, there's been various reports, isn't there, of his time with Kidderminster that they the Barcelona of non-league. So, I mean, that's encouraging stuff. I mean, I think when it's other people are saying that they play this nice brand of football, then you should always be a lot more encouraged, because I think they're probably going to be a little bit more honest. If we're, from our point of view, how many other people before Steve Cooper said that they did play this lovely football? Because I don't remember hearing it. So, obviously that was with Kidderminster. We are talking quite a lot lower down, but it does always show the argument that, for me, that when people say that you can't play football at a certain level, well, you can. It's just if you want to or not. I mean, Ian Ever did it, didn't he? At Barrow, took them up, and now he's at Bolton and he's taken them up. I mean, you can play nice football at whatever level if that's the way that you want to play. And I think at Kidderminster they did make the playoffs. They ultimately didn't go up, but obviously they did have success with it, didn't they? And obviously he's been at QPR now for the last 2 or 3 years, building on experience. And I mean, I look at, we played QPR, didn't we, close to the end of last season? Now, I know he wasn't the manager, but for being honest, they gave us a bit of idea.
It was a smash and grab there, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they got the goal late on, but I remember thinking at the time that, like, how deserved it was, because we really didn't play very well. And I mean, I think the game we played them on Boxing Day away, I mean, they were the better side, and we sort of nicked a goal on half time, and then
that's the one I'm talking about. Sorry, that was the one I was talking. When I say smash and grab, because they were certainly the better team in that Boxing Day game.
Yeah, they were. I mean, it's just that obviously we got a bit lucky with scoring on half time, didn't we? And then we nicked the second in the second half because they made a defensive mistake, 1-2-0. But for 40 minutes, they were by far the better team. And I mean, the other game that I was originally talking about, where they had the late winner at our place, they battered us. So I think don't get me wrong, it's not one of them that sounds incredibly exciting, is it? But I mean, a lot of the good Swansea managers that have been appointed have been like that, haven't they? So, he does sound like someone that wants to play the way that we want football to be played. So, yeah, I'm quietly encouraged by it. I think we'll have to see how it goes, really, won't we? I mean, as I said, coming in these circumstances isn't great. It could be a slow start, but yeah, I'm hopeful on John Eustace. I think it's a decent one, a bit left field, and yeah, hopefully it'll be a good appointment.
Yeah, and I suppose this will show us again, show us a little bit about the chairman as well, Steve, Julian Winter, because it's the first real decision he's had to make as a chairman for us. He's had to, oversee some, comings and goings, and most recently the Cooper situation. But in terms of appointing managers, we've been a bit spoiled, well, very spoiled really, over the last 15 plus years or so. With when we had like Hugh Jenkins as chairman, he would invariably pick the right man, even though at the time you'd have fans, scratching their heads and screaming blue murder kind of thing about how terrible that appointment will be. It was almost always right, wasn't it? He got it right almost every time. And I thought, would like to see that Julian Winter is of that same ilk, in that he wants the manager to come in and be of a certain type. And hopefully, let's just say, we're hearing good things about John Eustace, and if he is appointed, then there are a couple of other names. Is there anyone else that perhaps on the outskirts? I know I mentioned briefly Michael Appleton, and we wish him all the best in his fight against cancer, and hopefully he'll be back in football soon, having beaten it. He was certainly one that's been interesting to the Swans over the last few managerial appointments, really, and a couple of others as well, Steve, that just skirt the surface. I know a certain MK Dons manager, Russell Martin, has been one that we've spoken about previously. Again, they're of a certain ilk, aren't they? Managers that like to play football and like to entertain.
Yeah, they are. I mean, I echo what you said about Michael Appleton. I wish him well. It did sound like there may have been admirers in our boardroom, but obviously he's got far bigger priorities right now, I think. So that's completely understandable. He may have been someone that interested us. Yeah, I mean, Russell Martin was third favourite or something, is he? But I mean, John Eustace is about 1 to 10. So when you're second or third favourite, it's a bit pointless, isn't it, at that stage? But yeah, I can understand why he was in the thinking. I'm quite encouraged that he was. That indicates that we wanted to go for a football man. I think Cameron Toshak, obviously his name was mentioned. Like, that's not a huge surprise, although I think if he was going to get the job, it would have been when Cooper had it. Obviously Tate was mentioned. He wanted it before, didn't he? I wouldn't have been at all surprised if he's let it be known that he'd be interested this time. But it does seem like John Eustace, they decided pretty early on, really, that he's the person that they want.
Yeah, absolutely. Early days, and certainly without the manager at the moment, this is preempting it really. But if it is a footballing manager, if it is John Eustace, does he have the resources to get us top half next season? Do you hope for or expect a positive season, or is next season just about licking our wounds and making sure that we are we put ourselves back together as a club in readiness for seasons to come?
I mean, it's tough to say, really, isn't it? I mean, we're all probably hoping for mid-table. I mean, I would take that, if I'm honest. I think that would be a solid season. I mean, you look at it now, I just think we still need players. I mean, for me, there's a lack of creativity and a lack of pace in this team. Like, we urgently need to look at that. I mean, I think we will bring a couple more players in. I mean, there haven't really been many loans of there this time, which, I mean, there have been quite a few of since obviously we were relegated, especially under Steve Cooper. So we should be looking at that, really. I mean, they're the two things I think that we're lacking. I mean, obviously we complained about the lack of strikers last season, didn't we? But obviously Cullen now is a little bit older. We've got Joel Puro and Kyle Joseph. I mean, I'm assuming we're striker-wise, we're probably okay now, aren't we? So I mean, you could argue maybe that without Guay, you need another centre half. I think. Although I think if we're not going to play with a back three, then we probably don't. Goalkeeper wise, I guess if Bender's going to be the number one, I mean, that's, it's a slight gamble, but I mean, it's sort of is now or never for him if he's not going to play now. I mean, he certainly would need at least another loan spell. You don't want him being on the bench. So yeah, I think it's the creativity and pace that we need. So I'd probably like to see a number 10 come in and another wide player. That's what we should be looking for. I think if we do that, then things will be looking up.
Yeah, absolutely. As I just mentioned 10 minutes ago, today's game is being called off against Bristol Rovers. There's COVID in the Swans camp, sounds of things, and that has ongoing repercussions, Steve, doesn't it? I mean, that doesn't just mean that today's pre-season friendly, when they build fitness and tactics on, is off the cards and off the table, rather, is also repercussions for the remaining pre-season fixtures as well, in particular the midweek game against Forest Green. And we all talk about pre-season results not being important, but I don't think anyone ever says pre-season games in their entirety are unimportant, because, of course, match fitness, you want to go into the first game of the season is raring to go, and without those games under your belt, you can sometimes be a little bit slow out of the block. So it'll be a bit of a blow to the Swans, this, and on top of everything else that's going on, something we could have done without.
Yeah, it's not ideal, is it? And you think like the Swindon game was called off as well, wasn't it, for other reasons? So, I mean, we've only played one of our scheduled 3 pre-season games right now, haven't we? And obviously, there's no guarantees on the next couple at this stage. So, yeah, it's not been great, is it? I mean, it's what can you do? I suppose is the way of looking at it. But it's not ideal. I mean, we wish whoever's tested positive, well, I'm sure it'll be fine. But I mean, we don't know how many have tested positive or the impact that'll have now in terms of isolation. Obviously, now the new manager may well now only be able to meet some of those players just before the opening game of the season. So, I mean, it does make things tricky, doesn't it? There's no two ways on that. But I guess we've just got to get on with it. What else can you say, really? It's just something we've got to deal with.
It is. Yeah, well, that's just about it from us. I think we'll have more news in the coming weeks, no doubt, with the appointment of a manager, and we will certainly do a podcast on the eve of the season, just to get you up to speed and all excited for the term ahead. But absolutely, it's going to be an interesting couple of weeks for Swans fans. There'll be comings, there'll be goings, there'll be new management, and maybe even new management team in place. And who knows? One thing's for sure, it's never boring being a Swans fan. Well, thanks for listening. And for myself and Steve, bye-bye.